Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 95. Azric climbed the dais to his throne of office. Heavily gilded, the massive chair left nothing to the imagination for who ruled and who served. Azric raised his arm, symbolically beginning the meeting of his advisors and local functionaries. He chafed at the bit. He found himself returning to dwell on his exchange with a servant in his rooms. They had shown impudence, but had masked it well. As a minor lord began droning on, his temper flared. He hated the fact that he was a prisoner to day after day of this mindless rote. However, he trusted no one else to hold power in his stead. It was maddening. Azric sharply signaled with a wave of his hand, almost snapping in the dry air with his fury. The minor lord cut short abruptly. Silence descended on the room. It felt deafening to him. Azric slowly stood, gathering himself before the crowd of high and lower nobility that came at his command. He needed a ruse, some way to meet with Calian once he was within the city. He had just received word from one of the men he sent looking for Calian's arrival that he was indeed within the city. He needed to extricate himself without raising undue notice. Damn these infernal meetings. I am displeased. He let the word linger in the air, carrying over the heads of those seated in the front of the wide arc of chairs that had been positioned around the dais. When he did not elaborate, a quiet murmur started in small clusters throughout the room, hidden behind fans and turned heads. Does anyone know the source of my displeasure? Azric let this ring out for several moments. The question remained unanswered. No one was foolish enough to willingly become the target of his fury. They knew of his decisiveness in taking action, not caring so much for the accuracy, and more for the effect his punishment would produce. No one wanted to become the scapegoat. Azric had sentenced others to death for less. It was a useful thing to be known for this fact. Instead of crafting a reason for his displeasure, far better was it for those around him to invent one for him. Speculation would run rampant like wildfire as soon as he stepped from the room. He could not fathom a better way to draw attention away from the actions he was about to take. This meeting is adjourned. Cold anger suffused his countenance as he waited for the others to scurry from the room. Briskly moving after the room had emptied, he wasted no time in returning to his rooms. He would need to move in secret before questions were raised. More than anything, he needed to keep the other nobles and merchants off balance. Fear was a powerful tool in this regard, but he could not depend on it solely. He would need to temper it by publicly granting his favor to a selected few without giving a reason. The rumors would explode as those below him struggled to ascertain his motivations. 3 moves. He had always believed that he must keep himself at least 3 moves ahead to retain power. Only an amateur kept himself a single step ahead. After enough time, the amateur would inevitably miscalculated slip to fatal effect. It was a silly dance, to be sure, but the results were no less real for all the posturing that precluded them. A knife in the dark, a cup of poison, a fall from a high window thought to be suicide. There were so many ways to die. He could not simply wait and attempt to avoid them all in turn. Moving at a slightly increased pace, he did his best to keep himself from simply racing to his rooms. Above all, Azric knew he must maintain a cool demeanor to anyone who could be watching him for potential weaknesses. As soon as he closed the heavy door behind him, he moved to one of the heavy cords next to his enormous 4-poster bed. This would call one of his personal servants, and he could make way to travel in secret to meet Calian. He did not see the woman standing in the shadow of his armoire immediately. It took a moment for him to register. It was the same woman he had seen before. She had carefully done up her hair in long tresses that were elaborately braided. He looked into the same eyes, slivers of midnight that hovered above a wide beaming smile. It looked incongruous on her face. He had recognized that look she wore now for only a split second when she stood in his rooms earlier. His heart seized. The assassin! Her beaming smile broadened further. As she did so, she slipped one hand to her right shoulder, revealing pale flesh. She moved languidly, unafraid of his hesitation. Slowly slipping her other hand over her left shoulder, more pale flesh came into view. Her barely hidden bosom heaved invitingly as she demurely looked down, gracing him with a low curtsy, further putting herself on display. Asric stood there, unable to move. Mind racing, the tableau before him warred with his instincts. Where he expected a flashing blade, there stood only warm flesh, beckoning him onward. Her expression was all wrong. For a moment he met her jet black eyes, and he could see the feral hunger that lurked there, barely kept in check. Who was this woman? And why had he not been informed of her by his spymasters? She continued to move unhurriedly, stepping closer to him in small teasing steps. She moved with a fire that he now felt coursing through him. To not feel it would be to not be fully alive. Her swaying gait held him yet still. He realized he had not breathed for several moments. His mind screamed to take action against this threat, but his body refused to listen. It only heard the beat of pounding blood, awakening him fully. He found his arms outstretched to meet her. Grabbing her roughly by the shoulders, he pulled her to him, crushing her against his chest. With a swift move, he ripped her shift away from her breathless body. Her fingernails were tipped in fire as they traced tight patterns into his back. She tore at his robes of office like a feral dog, uncaring for the rich silks. He fell on top of her as they mounted the four-poster bed together, burying her deep into the satin sheets. His blood surged as his mind receded to a single point. Her eyes, droplets of midnight, called out to him like a siren song. Asric filled his desire wantonly before making quick, brutish movements, pressing himself into her loins. The cacophony of his passion was wrathful and lusty. He filled his broken cup until it overflowed with her, until he could smell nothing else but her in his nostrils. Miele fell to her passions, striving to meet the mad thrum of desire Asric held for her. She wrapped him deftly within her arms, holding on tight as they pounded away their journey towards nightfall. Hours passed, and still she felt his craving, his hunger hot on her lips. He sought her like a derelict sailor drowning at sea. His heavy muscled arms pinned her legs apart, forcing his passion onward. She breathed in a sigh as she began to float away from the hot, sweaty room. Her hair clung to the nape of her neck, heating her further as she lay fanning herself. She had forgotten all other thought when she found herself meeting his fierce eyes, when he had burst into the room. She had expected him to be gone for hours yet. She had not prepared. Heat took her again, pulled at her, demanded her. She gave in, and felt herself disappear into his storming passion once again. The windows spattered with heavy drops as her voice rose within the thick walls of the keep. Echoes of thunder rumbled in time with her heartbeats. His mouth sought her out, and all thought fled from her.